we have Chris Tkachuk. Chris has worked with Fortune for over 15 years. Got the order wrong on the slide, please. Thank you. He's a senior editor of Fortune magazine. He's been a reporter, a writer, and an editor. He's been in the best company's business for 15 years. For the past 5 years, he's been the managing editor of all of Fortune's print, digital career, and workplace content. In addition, he edits all of Fortune's large franchise lists, including the world's most admired, the best advice, Fortune 500, and the fastest growing companies. Joining him on the stage will be Dick Costolo, the CEO of Twitter. Dick joined Twitter as CEO in 2010. Since that time, the global active user base for Twitter has quadrupled to more than 284 million monthly active users. The company has tripled in size and has opened offices all around the world. Previously, he was co-founder and CEO of FeedBurner, a digital content syndication platform that was acquired by Google in 2007. Early in his career, he was an improv performer with the Annoyance Theater, which means he's got jokes. He holds a BS degree in computer science and an honorary Doctor of Laws degree from the University of Michigan. Please welcome Chris and Dick to the stage.
Dick Costolo, thank you for joining me here today, and thanks to all of you who are in attendance and who are watching online on Fortune.com. Because this is being live streamed, we're wanting to poll the audience for questions, and I'm going to give the hashtag early during the interview so that you can think about what you might want to ask our guest today. So the hashtag is going to be GPTW Keynote. So Twitter is a $1.4 billion company. This is in revenue from 2014. And it has a total U.S. workforce, full-time employees of 2,530 workers. In the past year, at least from 2013 to 2014, there were 950 full-time jobs that were added. The company was founded in 2006, and Dick joined in 2009 as COO and then became CEO in 2010. I'm just giving you some perspective in terms of its size right now. So when you think about the number of jobs that are available at all the companies on the 100 best list, everyone wants to know how many applicants do they get. Well, even though it's much smaller than Google, which has been number one on our list for 6 years, Twitter, which debuted at number 24 this year, had an average of 230 applicants for every job opening it had, which is far more than Google's 140 applicants. So it shows both your scale, but also that there's great interest from everyone who wants to get a job working for you.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a bit about transparency, which is a big topic, just in terms of leadership and leadership at small companies, but specifically at some of the startups that don't have the same kind of scrutiny that public companies do.
Yeah.
So you went public in 2013.
Yeah, November 2013.
Right, exactly. So there's a freedom from shareholders for startups, and at least until they decided to IPO.
Yeah.
So they usually have to deal with the day-to-day volatility of the stock market. So they usually have to, when they decide to IPO, they say, what am I going to be subject to? What kind of questions are going to be asked of me? So earlier this year, you sent out an email that was leaked, in which you basically, you said, we suck at dealing with abuse.
Yeah. I never use that. I almost never use that kind of that sort of coarse language in emails to the company. And of course, that's the one that ends up getting leaked. My mom was disappointed that I used the term suck.
And what did she say to
don't
you?
Don't you have a better vocabulary than that? I'm like, no.
Well, I just want to quote from the email because it's important to note exactly what was said and the reason why you sent it. You said, we suck at dealing with abuse and trolls on the platform, and we've sucked at it for years. It's no secret, and the rest of the world talks about it every day. We lose core user after core user by not addressing simple trolling issues that they face every day. And this is what I think is most important and shows great leadership, is that you said, I'm frankly ashamed of how poorly we dealt with the issue during my tenure as CEO. It's absurd. There's no excuse for it. I take full responsibility for not being more aggressive on this front. It's nobody else's fault but mine, and it's embarrassing. So I want to know, now that you're under more scrutiny and that you have to worry about, what shareholders' concerns are and what the day-to-day stock price is, how transparent can you be? At what point do you actually draw the line?
I think I love that question because it's a particular, I think, challenge for companies going public to think about how they can maintain open lines of communication and share as much information as possible. And there's a tendency in functional organizations, any sort of functional organization, there's just a natural tendency toward, well, we shouldn't share that information. And when you go public, that starts to become an excuse. Well, obviously we can't share this information now because we're public, and if everyone, that could leak. And I had a great conversation with another CEO before we were a public company, and I was just asking a few people, what's important, what's going to be different for me that I'm not expecting? And this other CEO said to me, because of these tendencies in an organization to want to, keep information, they'll use being public as an excuse for that. And what you want to do is make sure you're actually sharing more information once you're a public company and push back against that. So that's something, I just had a conversation internally about this the other day when we were going through some quarterly metrics and told my team, nope, I want to tell everybody exactly what these metrics are and what these look like, not hide them behind some variable that we don't disclose and say, well, we can't tell you that until this date because we're a public company. So I think that it's critical for the leader in an organization and a company that's gone public to fight back against that and be very vocal about pushing back against that natural tendency of organizations to want to keep information close.
So I just want to use as an example about transparency. We look at Whole Foods Market, which has been on the Fortune 100 Best Companies list for 18 years. They do things quite differently, but they also publish, or at least they have in past years, they've published the compensation list for either every job category or whatever, so that anyone can go to it and see, what their coworkers are making. And so is that something that you would ever consider doing, or does that go sort of beyond what your mission is?
Well, it's something we discuss, and I think it's important to discuss things like that. You want to get feedback from people in the company when you have an idea or when they have an idea and see what other people think about it. There are all sorts of reasons to do it, and then there are all sorts of reasons that individual employees don't want that to be the case. And would actually really, really very much dislike that to be the case, all sorts of personal privacy reasons. But that's a discussion we have, and I think it's important to have those discussions. One of the fascinating things to me when we were backstage was that conversation about the employee talking to the CEO and having issues with the workplace, and the CEO saying, what are you talking about? This is a great place to work. The best way to make sure your employees don't tell you the truth is to, argue with them then when they have the courage to speak up to you, right? Someone actually walked into the CEO's office there and said, I don't think this is a great place to work, or whatever they said. Imagine the courage and the guts it takes to walk into this high-status relationship with the person who runs the whole company, whose view is completely distorted, because the view from the top is always distorted. You finally work up the courage to tell the CEO how messed up your situation is, and the person says, what are you talking about? This is a great place to work. Good luck ever getting anyone to tell you the truth again. So I think it's important to have all of those kinds of discussions and then not make decisions about them without gathering lots of feedback. It would be very easy for me to say, my salary is already public. It's right there in the, SEC filings we had to make. Let's just do that for everybody. It doesn't bother me. Mm-hmm. There are all sorts of reasons people don't want that to be the case, and you have to go find out what those are.
Okay. I want to ask a bit about the issue that was raised in that email that you had sent about the Twitter trolls and the abuse, the spam, people having an easier access, or at least less access now, I guess, in terms of, hacking into accounts. I mean, I like to use the example of the first time I ever logged into Twitter, created an account. Very next day, it's like 3 or 4 years ago, the very next day, my account was hacked, and someone sent out a very funny tweet that I'm just going to repeat because I think it's funny, which basically said, "I love the smell of newborn babies so much, I want to shove one up each nostril and get high." And then it gave you like a link of like buying Viagra illegally online. So, I mean, I found it funny, but you know, it was at least a clever hacking email, but whatever. What have you done to either contain that or to eliminate it completely? I mean, how much progress have you made?
There's a couple different things there. On the security front, we've added all sorts of capabilities, everything from two-factor authentication to really forcing, now requiring, I should say, mobile verification on all sorts of things. And then since I sent out that note, I mean, there are times when, as a CEO, you have to sort of pull the CEO lever. And what was going on behind that note that you read and reminded me of is that I was, in taking responsibility for it, I also then gave myself ownership of the problem and said, okay, I'm going to put this on my shoulders and we're going to fix it. And I very rarely prescribe to the team how we're going to go do something, but in this case, it's been going on long enough. And I sent that note out and then prescribed, here's how we're going to deal with it. And I pulled my general counsel aside and the head of product safety aside and went through exactly what we're going to do. And you're seeing the results of that. In fact, we released a bunch of new capabilities yesterday.
I want to talk a bit about your years of experience working at Google. I just want to know, what did you learn from Google? I mean, it's been on our list for a number of years. What did you learn that you applied to your role as CEO at Twitter? Were there things that you saw at Google that you knew would not work for Twitter?
The things that I saw at Google that I definitely have applied at Twitter are OKRs, objectives and key results. And those are a great way to help everyone in the company understand what's important and how you're going to measure what's important. It's essentially a great way to communicate strategy and how you're going to measure strategy. And that's how we try to use them. As you grow an organization in a company, the single hardest thing to make sure you scale is communication. It's like remarkably difficult, irrespective of how important you say it is. You have to design it into the company and architect for it. And I think we try to do that in all sorts of ways. And objectives and key results, OKRs, are a great way of making sure everybody understands how you're going to measure how successful you are against the strategy.
Okay. I look at your staffing numbers, and I think it's something like a little over 2,000 of your employees have been with the company for less than 3 years. So, you've grown quite a bit very, very quickly. How have you managed that growth? I mean, just both in terms of communication and then figuring out, where are we going to put everyone?
Well, that's more of a real estate and facilities challenge, which you just have to stay ahead of. Right. And in fact, the interesting challenge is that we're scaling that organization globally, so you have that real estate and facilities challenge globally, and you always have to stay one step ahead of where you believe you're going to be growing in the next few years, where you might only have 3 people now. I think we were, I might get these numbers a little bit wrong, but you'll get a sense of it. I think we had 3 people in Singapore 12 months ago, and we now have 82 people in Singapore. So you need to be out ahead of that and plan for it and so forth, and we do that. So a couple things about bringing new people into the company and making sure they're up to speed quickly. I take time to speak to every new hire class that we have. We've put everybody who's brought into the company through a very specific set of orientation, and I take time out personally to go talk to them and make sure I spend time with them. I spend most of that time answering questions, and I make sure that they understand from day one that anybody in the company can ask me anything. And people do, and I like it when people do, and I like it when people challenge me. Because if everybody sees that anyone in the company can challenge the CEO, then they start to understand that it should be expected that anyone in the company can question or have a discourse or debate with anybody in the company, with their boss, with their manager, with some vice president. And I encourage that, and I encourage it in from day one in that new hire orientation session. In fact, when people ask me particularly challenging questions in that session, I spend the most time on them and really sort of get more animated about them and excited about them so that people see, oh, Dick enjoyed that when I challenged him on this. Again, when you're going back to what was just said earlier on stage, what are you talking about? This is a great place to work. I had a CEO tell me once, we were out to dinner, we have these like CEO dinners with a few other private company CEOs at the time, and the CEO told me, we had an offsite the other day with my executive team, and we were having a discussion about the future of the company, and one of these people who works for me, you're not going to believe this, has the audacity to say, I think, our vision is wrong. Can you believe that? So I pounded the table and said, that's not what we're here to discuss. And I said to him, that's horrible. What are you doing? The surest way to make sure that today's vision becomes tomorrow's dogma is to let everybody know you're not allowed to ask questions about it. And they might believe it today, but you won't know when it becomes dogma because no one's allowed to challenge it. So I invite that and encourage it because the most important thing in a company, in a learning organization, the most important thing is to get to the truth. And the fastest way to get to the truth is discourse. Now the challenge there, the really, really hard part, is that what happens when you start to have debates and challenge people? You get that kind of response. What are you talking about? This is a great place to work. But more likely and more frequently, one of the parties in the debate starts to personalize the debate. I don't think that the way we're thinking about the key results for this objective are appropriate. I think we're measuring the wrong outputs, and in fact, I think we've been doing it incorrectly for the last 6 months since you took over the organization, right? That's a way of it gets personalized to since you took over the organization. Or the first person challenges something appropriately and respectfully, but the respondent says, well, you always complain, right? And now we've personalized this debate. It's no longer about the OKRs, and now it's about whether or not I'm a complainer. So it's really important to get to the truth, and it's also really hard, and that's what you constantly have to be working with the company on understanding.
So how do you handle or mediate at least those types of problems when they arise within the company? I mean, if someone comes to you with a problem, if it escalates to you, how are you usually going to attack it?
You have to communicate with them forthrightly. I actually get in front of the company and talk about discourse and the importance of discourse and the appropriate way to debate. And in fact, if I think that somebody has asked a question, we have a sort of an internal version of Quora, if you will, a question and answer forum that we call Falquora. I don't know where the name came from. All of our names internally are usually some combination of a bird name and then some other term. So maybe it was Falcon and Quora. I actually have no idea.
It'll be Falcor from.
Yeah. So I'll respond to questions with sometimes in two ways. I'll start off by saying, I don't like the way this question is asked. We're not here to interrogate each other and put each other on the witness stand. Discourse isn't about interrogating your opponents and putting them and being a prosecutor. It's about having open debate to get to the truth. So I'll point out that I don't like the way the question was asked, but then I'll go ahead and answer the question.
Okay. It has been projected that millennials will represent 75% of the workforce by 2025. You have a large number of millennials working for you. 65% of your organization are under the age of 35. And they seem to be the talent demographic that most mystifies Gen Xers and baby boomers. I mean, I feel like every day you're seeing a story, fortunately, we're guilty of this too. Every day there's a new story or with someone with a new philosophy about how to manage them best or the secret about what they want. So as the manager of roughly 2,000 or more people who fall into that, that generation, can you tell me definitively, what do millennials want?
I tend to be a contrarian on generation this, generation that. The people who were born in the 80s are like this. People who were born in the 70s were the me generation. XYZ. I tend to be a. Yeah. That was from people who were born in the 70s who were like, yeah, the me generation.
That's me.
That
too.
was awesome. I just tend to think that sort of it's convenience that I don't think is really true. It is generally the case that people who are entering the workforce these days, I think, want the same thing that they've always wanted, which is respect and the ability to have some authority and ownership of their work. And by ownership, I mean accountability with authority, right? I want to be able to make decisions and get the work done the way I want to get it done, and understand how my work ties back to the success of the company. Nothing is more motivating or exciting for someone than when they really truly understand how their work connects to the goals and the mission of the company, and then they're empowered, if you will. I think this is maybe an overused word, but they have ownership of going and crafting that solution. There are lots of cases, I mean, you see it all the time in every organization, where people have accountability with no authority. Here's what you're going to be accountable to. By the way, you have to do it this exact way. Well, that's not super motivating for anybody. And then, of course, worse, you have authority. Worst of all, authority with no accountability.
Okay. So there's an ongoing sort of discussion among tech companies and other companies in Silicon Valley, and that's saying that the age of perks is pretty much over, that has run its course. As a company that offers not only on-site CrossFit and massages, and you have, I guess, kombucha on tap in addition to beer and wine, which to me sounds great idea. That there are also some executives who say that it doesn't matter how many of these great perks and free food that they're offering or game rooms they have on site, that the best talent that they have will quickly lose interest, either because there's another great opportunity around the corner or there's more money being offered by a well-funded startup. And I know that you've had a number of senior executives leave Twitter in the past year or so.
Yeah, they didn't leave because we had kombucha, the wrong kind of kombucha.
There's other opportunities, right? So what are you doing to prevent that brain drain? How do you retain your most talented employees?
It's really important not to confuse perks with the culture of the company. I think that's a huge mistake that you see made in some places. Those perks are there to make the workplace more comfortable, make it easy for people to be more productive. They don't have to, go leave the building for an hour and a half to go get lunch or dinner when they're working late. It's right there, for example. And so I think those things are just an element to the company that we have that make it easier for people to be more productive. I wouldn't confuse them at all with being important to the culture specifically. The way you keep great people is, one, they want to work with other great people. I always tell my managers, I teach a course in management at Twitter to anyone who's managing a large group of people, eventually goes through it. Got another couple sessions coming up next month. And I always tell managers, it's not your job to defend your team, it's your job to improve your team. And what I mean by that is, if you've got people on the team who are not performing, everybody else on that team knows it. And you may think they're fooled when you defend them, but they're not fooled and they know it. And now they just think that you're not wise enough or observant enough to figure it out. So one, they have to know that they're working with other great people. Nothing's more fun or exciting than working in a great team where you feel like, wow, everyone on this team is putting in the effort, is highly competent, is highly productive. It raises your own game. And then two, it's important to always remind people why you're doing something, and why you have to achieve what you have to achieve, not what you have to achieve. You just get up there in front of a company and tell them, this is what we have to do. So what? It just sounds like work. when you help them understand why you must achieve what you must achieve, and you connect it to your mission, and you show them the stories of how it's worked, and we have, at Twitter, by the way, at Twitter, if I can't do that at Twitter, that's a complete fail, because we have example after example after example. And we talk about those examples, and we re-articulate the why, and I think that's how you get people to understand why it's a great place to work and how you prevent them from leaving.
Okay. I want to talk a bit about social responsibility, how companies can
Can I say one more thing about that?
Yeah, please do.
I just sort of a bone to pick with some classic processes that go on. So what happens when you have some regretted attrition? What do people start doing? They say, well, we have to do exit interviews and find out why people are leaving. And then there's a chart that comes up and says, the reason people are leaving is, and the answers sound exactly like what happens when I break up with someone I'm dating. It's not you, it's me. I wanna go to a smaller company. I wanna go to a bigger company. We are a small company. I wanna go to a bigger company.
Yeah.
And the truth is, everybody quits their manager. And they quit their manager because their manager doesn't communicate, because their manager doesn't give them ownership, accountability with authority, because their manager defends the team when the team is weak and doesn't improve the team, because their manager doesn't have one-on-ones with them and help them understand how to be successful in their career, understand what's personally bothering them, understand how to remove barriers to getting their work done and be more productive. And those are the kinds of things I talk about in my management course I teach. People quit their manager. They just do. And so I've always sort of snicker at those exit interview questions and think they should be much different than why are you leaving?
So you don't like it when people break up with you, is what you're saying.
Nobody likes to be broken up with. Also, it's a small world, right? It's not the person who's leaving is not being not trying to be like, oh, I'm gonna hide the ball here. They're like, look, I might have to, I'm not in a position of seniority to the person who I'm leaving because of. They were my manager, they were my director, they were my vice president. They might be in a position of authority somewhere else soon. They probably know people in positions of authority at other companies I want to go to. I'm not going to throw them under the bus on my way out the door. Of course they're not. So they say these other things.
Okay. Going back to the social responsibility question, Twitter has opened, or at least it's opening soon, the Neighbor Nest.
It's open.
It is open.
Just
okay.
opened.
Just opened. In which local adults, I guess, can come and take computer classes that are staffed by volunteers from Twitter, from
That's right.
Twitter employees. So
everything from programming classes to this is the way to use these office productivity tools like word processing software, spreadsheet software, et cetera. There's also a little sort of carved out daycare center, if you will, in there for adults to bring their kids in who don't have anywhere else to have their kids watched while they're working on things like working on the resume or trying to find work, et cetera. So we've set that up right in the building right across the street from us.
That's a very local community-focused project.
That's correct.
But I want to talk about the fact that Twitter has such a humongous reach and that it could have a much bigger say in certain things. I mean, if you want to look at, in terms of corporate social responsibility, look at the state of Indiana recently when it decided to pass this Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and everyone took to Twitter. I mean, business leaders, CEOs were speaking out. Have you had an internal discussion ever about your role in this? Have you had any either company or other CEOs come to you and say, hey, can you help promote my tweet so that I can get more attention to this either very politically infused message or this position they've taken?
That happens with some frequency. We generally, I think it's correct to say that we generally stay away from that kind of stuff because then who decides what's an appropriate thing to support and what's not. So I personally get behind some of these things and was one of the signatories of Max Levchin's a big full-page ad about that particular issue in Indiana and elsewhere. When we think about our work at Twitter and how we give back, we really try to, I think it's important to focus. If you try to do 19 things, you're not going to be able to fund anything well. You're going to be pretty haphazard about what you're able to really build meaningful support for and make meaningful impact on. And so the things we generally get behind and try to focus our efforts around are community work in the very focused communities in which we work. So by that I mean not San Francisco, support for San Francisco community organizations, but the Tenderloin, which is the neighborhood in which we work. There are a couple specific organizations in that neighborhood, Compass Family Services and Boys and Girls Club of San Francisco, that have 2 clubhouses in the Tenderloin that we direct our attention and focus and support for. And then more broadly, outside of our community work, the thing that we really try to focus on is teaching Girls Who Code and those kinds of programs. Teaching high school girls to program, understand why it's important, why it's cool. The sad statistics when you look at them about when you ask, 3rd grade girls what they want to do when they grow up, and then go and ask 10th grade or 11th grade girls what they want to do when they graduate from college. There's a massive drop-off in the percentage that say they want to go into STEM fields. And so a lot of this is not just teaching them how to do it, but helping them understand, look, you're going to have remarkable ability to decide what you want to do with your own life and power to decide what you want to do with your life if you have this capability because of the opportunities that will be afforded to you. And I think that the folks at Twitter who teach those classes, and we support a bunch of them, an ever-increasing number of them every summer, do a great job of that.
Big question in corporate America is also how should companies not maybe limit use of social media while at work? I mean, what advice do you have? I mean,
we don't limit. I encourage it.
You don't want it to, but
I think everybody should always be on it.
Right, of course. Very odd message.
You're asking the wrong dude
whether. When someone comes to you and says, "Why should I allow my
I don't have a good answer for them why they should limit it.
All right.
Look, I'll say this about it. The funny thing about when we went public, one of the questions I would always get was, now you're going to be, you're really going to be under public scrutiny. I sort of laughed at that and said, have you been looking at my mentions timeline for the last, 2 years? The great thing about platforms like Twitter is you get a direct connection to your world. And for everybody in this room, a big part of that world is their work and their passion about their work. And there's no better way to get an immediate understanding of what people are saying and thinking about, and, both within and outside your company than platforms like Twitter.
Okay. We're going to take some questions from the audience. So there will be microphones running up and down the aisle. So if you have any questions, raise your hand. And you can also send questions via Twitter. The hashtag again is GPTW Keynote. So we have one question over here.
Thank you very much. My question is in regards to transparency. How do you work with your PR team to make that appropriate or safe to share stats and information internally? Is there any issue about that leaking?
Sure. I guess I would say that that's a tension, and I try to always push back against that. I'm the one that's usually trying to make sure we're sharing as much information as possible, even if it's uncomfortable. Our diversity data and gender data that we've shared was, you look at it, you think, uh-oh, that's we've got to fix that, and that's something we've been wanting to fix. Deal with for some time, like so many other companies in the technology space. One of the things I encourage other CEOs to do is when you start discussing it and start measuring it and start telling your leaders, one of your success criteria is for example, one of your success criteria is bringing in and developing women engineering leaders. then, surprise, surprise, if your team is, if your team is robust at execution, that starts to be one of the things you get better at because everybody's talking about it, everybody sees what it is, everybody's paying attention to it. So I think that those things are important, and I try to broadly push information out, but just to be perfectly frank about it, there's always a tension around, we can't talk about that now for this reason, or we shouldn't talk about this now for that reason. And I think it's important that everyone in the company see that it's important to me that we divulge more information and be more open than more closed and more secretive.
I want to take one of the questions from Twitter. Brandon Tidwell from Blue Shield of California asks, companies like Twitter lead the nation on talent. What will be the most critical to having the best talent 5 years from today?
Yeah, well, two things. One, you have to have the world-leading products and services to attract world-leading talent. That probably goes without saying. But it starts with the products and services and the things you're building, and are they exciting, and are people excited about them? Having said that, and assuming we're now talking about, all right, now it's a battle between us and two other similar companies that have that. I'm a big, big fan of Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, and the fact that all sorts of biases creep into the way you work and the way you think and the way you make decisions. And they're subconscious, and even when you know about them and pay attention to them in yourself, they're still dragged into the way you think about working, the way you think about hiring, et cetera. And so I say that by way of saying that it's going to be absolutely vital to sort of eradicate that bias of the rest of the people in the company need to be kind of like the person running the company. And that you can filter that all the way down from, looks the same, is of the same gender, to does or doesn't have a sense of humor because I do or don't have a sense of humor, et cetera. And you make better decisions when you gather feedback as a company from diverse groups of people. And when diverse groups of people have ownership of innovation. It's certainly not going to be the case, and I think most great CEOs would tell you that with 4,000 people across the global organization, I'm not going to have all the great ideas. They're going to come from everywhere in the company, and the more diverse that 4,000 people is, the better selection of ideas you're going to have.
Tabitha SF asks, what's the toughest question an employee has ever asked you? And I want to add to that, what's the harshest criticism you've ever received from an employee?
Well, the toughest questions that employees ask you are any time they ask all the time, I think, things like, was that a mistake? And I think that's a hard question. Like, I try to, let me preface this by saying, I make a lot of mistakes, right? All CEOs do, all leadership teams do, et cetera. Ed Catmull from Pixar famously says, and I completely agree with this, it's not your job as a leader to prevent mistakes from happening, it's your job to correct them as soon as they happen. As part of that, I think it's vital as a leader to acknowledge your mistakes when you make them, because you want everybody else in the organization to acknowledge mistakes when they're made so that you can correct them as quickly as possible. So I try to acknowledge my mistakes when I make them. I love it but it's hard, when you're standing up there in front of the company and someone walks up to the microphone and says, you recently said, X, Y, Z. It now turns out to be the case that ABC happened. Did you make a huge mistake there, and how do you feel about that? Those kinds of things are hard. They're hard questions. But I like it when people ask me those, and I try to be honest and forthright about my opinion, whether I now believe it to be a mistake or disagree with them, because I want the rest of my leadership team to see that it's okay to be challenged so that you can get to the truth. I don't remember, there were 3 other questions on there, and I went to look back at them, and I don't remember what they were because they've changed to the next question now.
What was the harshest criticism
Oh, the
you've
harshest
received?
criticism is, are things like after my attempt to answer something forthrightly, people saying, I think you're, people saying like in an anonymous follow-up on the Q&A forum, like I think Dick's, spinning us. The reason that particularly gets to me is because if there's one thing I really, really try my best not to ever do to the company is spin it. If your people think you're spinning them, that's probably the worst possible thing that you can do or that can happen for communication within a company, for people not to think that the CEO is being forthright with them. So when that happens, that particularly affects me, and I try to go out of my way to make sure I figure out why that they believe that to be the case.
Okay. We have another question from the audience.
By the way, the way not to respond to things like that is, I'm not spinning you, right? You want to go, they have a perception that you're spinning them, you should go figure out why they think that's the case.
Okay.
Hi, so you've spoken about a lot of leadership behaviors that are important at Twitter, and I'm wondering how you hold your leaders and managers accountable for those behaviors. Yeah.
Other than communication, which is, hopefully beaten that horse to death, politics is probably the thing you want to eradicate from your leadership team the most. And so you just always want to be making sure that you're not enabling that. And it gets enabled in all sorts of subtle ways. Saying something in a one-on-one when an employee tells you that they have an issue with someone else on the team, and you make some, off the cuff, what you perceive to be innocuous remark about that other employee, that then gets out there and is perceived as, oh, Dick's having conversations with person A about person X. Even if it's being soft on person X, like by which I mean, even if you're making an excuse for person X. So you just have to be really conscious as a leader not to enable how can this conversation be taken outside this room and, used for political purposes. And I think that the way I try to do that is twofold. One, if there's an issue on my team that comes up in a one-on-one, the very first thing I say is, great, bring that up at staff today at the very beginning of the meeting. Like, I don't want to talk about it right now. Like, we're going to have that conversation with everybody in the room. And if it's about, this person disagreeing with that person, and I feel like I'm starting to get lobbied by a group that agrees with person X, I'll say things like, great, you and you who disagree with each other, go away and come back and propose a solution to me, right? So you're just, but there's always tension there, and you just want to make sure that everybody on your team knows that there aren't politics in the organization, or they're not going to be tolerated on your team, and you're going to punish them when they happen. These things come up in all sorts of little insidious ways, right? In the example I just gave, hey, Jim and I disagree about the right way to do this, but we've gotten together and I think we have a great solution. Great, let's hear it. I'll propose the solution. Okay, great. Is anything else I should know about here? Nope, we disagreed, but now we're together on this, and here's the solution. And then you'll make a decision. You'll come to find out actually there was a third person who was way over here on the debate, or a third group of people who feel completely differently, whose voices weren't heard in that debate. And you just have to be you have to punish that behavior when it happens. One CEO I know will go out of his way to then reverse the decision and do whatever that third party wanted to do, irrespective of how much he loathes that particular point of view. And I think that's one way of dealing with it. There are other ways to punish that sort of behavior. No meetings after the meeting, no meetings before the meeting. Hey, let's talk about this before we talk about it with the rest of the group, et cetera.
Okay, so Mark _Spato, I think I'm saying that right, asks, can you share your definition of employee engagement? So what do you do to engage your employees?
So I try to be really present, and what I mean by that is, Janet Van Hoyst is one of my executives in the HR department is here in the crowd today, and we were talking about this just yesterday. I know probably 500, 600 employees by name, and when I see them, I address them by name, and I try to be really present for them and all the other employees. And by present, I mean not just passing in the hallway and going, what's going on, but like walking up to their desk and standing there and, talking to them.
Having a real conversation.
Having a real conversation. Now, I also have to be alert to the fact that as we grow and the distance between the CEO and new employee X becomes greater, that I have to go out of my way to make them comfortable, with having a conversation with me. And there are all sorts of ways to do that. There are a couple people in the company who will particularly give me a hard time almost any time I see them. So I'll go out of my way sometimes to go talk to them, and just joking around mostly, but they'll give me a hard time because they know they can. I'll go out of my way to talk to them in big rooms like our lunchroom, or make sure I engage them at our all hands meetings, et cetera, so that people can see it's okay to do that, because look, the other side of that coin is I walked up to this person the other day, and as I was walking up to them, someone just wanted to ask a quick question to. They sort of like tightened up and went, "Don't ask me any hard questions." They've only been at the company for a couple weeks, and so you just have to let them know and make it clear to them, like I'm not here to do a performance evaluation of you. I just want to ask a question. I mean, even as far as things like I'll just walk by somebody's desk now and say, "Hey, is Rob here?" I'm like, "No." I'll tell him he came by. "Okay, great, thanks." And 5 minutes later, Rob is like sweating, red in front of my, like, "I was at the doctor's, but I heard you were looking for me." "Oh no, I wanted to, ask you if you went for a run last night." So you have to be, you have to caveat all this open communication and forthrightness and direct to employee communication with. I have to caveat it now with, this is just my opinion, or hey, Rob doesn't need to come find me right away, et cetera.
Okay, one final question, and this is from me. What's the best advice you've ever received?
The best advice I ever received, I think this is directly from, or a version of it is from Ben Horowitz, the partner at Andreessen Horowitz and former CEO of Opsware, which goes directly to my thoughts about communication, which is make sure everybody understands what you understand. I can't tell you how important that is for leaders. You may think you've helped explain and given context for a decision 91 times, and there will still be people who walk up to you and say, "I don't understand why we decided to do X." And you'll think to yourself, "You got to be kidding me. I've stood in front of the company for the last 2 years, and I start off the meeting with, here's why we decided to do X." You have to constantly work to make sure everybody understands what you understand, and the context for decisions that have been made. When people have context for decisions that have been made, they may not agree with them, but they will commit to executing against them if they have your context for them.
Great. Thank you very much, Doug Costolo.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.